the human story is, without a doubt, the best story to have ever happened. We've gone from primordial soup to spanning the earth, to even going beyond the earth. And it's for that reason that I became an anthropologist. So today and in future videos, join me as we talk about this crazy, awesome, wonderful existence that we know as humanity. So, what is anthropology? Well, in a textbook, you might get a definition like it's a study of humans, their societies, and their cultures over time. And that is absolutely correct. But I also want to make known that anthropology is more than that. In my studies so far, I've also had to learn about things like geology and psychology. I've had to learn about things like sociology and anatomy as well. But the part that stands out to me is the idea that as an anthropologist, I'm telling humanity's story, and I hope that I'm doing a good job of that. And that starts with actually making videos about anthropology. So welcome. In this video and in future videos, we're going to be talking about humanity's story. And ultimately, the point I really want to drive home with all of this is humanity's story is also the story of you. So join me as we discuss and we learn about humanity's story. So, to begin the story of you, we have to go way back in time. Today we'll be discussing our human relatives. Now, you might be tempted to think that this doesn't apply to you, but I'd argue that it probably does at the genetic level. Now, I'm generalizing here, but the average person, so the average Homo sapiens, has between 0 to up to 6% Neanderthal DNA. Some people have small percentages of Denisovan DNA mixed in as well. Both Denisovans and Neanderthals are cousins of ours, genetically speaking. For thousands of years, other species of humans lived on Earth, even at the same time. On the screen, there's a photo showing this timeline. You'll note that our species, Homo sapiens, lived concurrently with few other species, Neanderthals being one of them. Denisovans, notably, aren't shown on this picture, and that's because they're still being studied. There's not a lot of archaeological evidence to go off of. We mainly know of their existence through genetics. On that note, no other human species survives into the present day, other than Homo sapiens. That's us. And today, I want to bring in a few stories that I've learned through my time studying anthropology from the end of the other humans. And today specifically, we'll be focusing on a couple stories from the end of the Neanderthals. For this section, I'll be referencing an article called New Neanderthal Remains Associated with the Flower Burial at Shanidar Cave. I'm making note of it because if you ever get the chance, you should absolutely read this article, even if you've never read an academic article before. The team that wrote this research paper did a fantastic job researching what we're about to talk about, and I really appreciate their care and compassion that is evident throughout the entirety of the article. As you might have guessed, our first story brings us to Shanidar Cave, located in modern-day Iraqi Kurdistan. The site was originally excavated by the late Ralph Selecki, who lived to be 101. He originally excavated part of the cave between 1951 and 1960, whereupon he found the remains of 10 different Neanderthals. What was most important from his finds was his assessment that some of the remains were intentionally buried there. Even more, he assessed that some of the remains had flowers placed alongside them, indicating that their burial was a conscious mortuary practice. Two bodies from Shanidar Cave tell stories that I want to share with you. On one hand, the first body, called Shanidar 1, shows signs of care despite previous injuries. So this means that he was nursed back to health by members of his group after being injured. Now, I'm being nice when I say injuries. Shanidar 1, while he was alive, was not necessarily in good shape. According to a 2017 paper by Trinkas and Villouet, his left orbit, so the bone that goes around his eye, was crushed. His right forearm and hand were missing. He was deaf in his right ear and partially deaf in his left. He wasn't able to walk normally because of osteoarthritis, and finally he had hyperostotic disease, which means he didn't have full range of motion in his back and shoulders. Despite all of this trauma that would have been hard to live with even by modern day standards, It is thought that Shanidar I was somewhere in his 50s when he passed away. While we can't glean much more off of his remains, it is incredibly apparent that Shanidar I was cared for for a long time, and despite what would have likely been massive cost to the group at large. Think about it. Someone who was partially blind, almost wholly deaf, an amputee, and had restricted mobility in the time of hunter-gatherer societies would need extraordinary care. Now, while Shanidar I's remains can't directly tell us this, if I could bet on it, I would absolutely go as far to say that Shanidar I wasn't just cared for, he was loved. On the other hand, the second body, Shanidar III, shows signs of violence. Their ninth rib was punctured by a relatively low-velocity stone projectile. This point is incredibly important, since according to a 2009 paper by Churchill et al., it could be indicative of interspecies conflict, specifically conflict between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. There are two factors contributing to this assessment. The first factor is the fact that it is not currently believed that Neanderthals used long-range projectiles such as spears or dart throwers. The second factor is the fact that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals lived in West Asia 50,000 years ago. I want to highlight the fact there is some nuance to this. Homo sapiens are found in the archaeological record in West Asia dating from 130 to 80,000 years ago. Then they disappear. This could be for a number of reasons. Maybe we just aren't lucky. Maybe something happened for 30,000 years that prevented their remains from fossilizing. Or maybe Homo sapiens left West Asia for a multitude of reasons. Whatever the reason, Homo sapiens reappear in the West Asian archaeological record 50,000 years ago. At the end of the time, we find Neanderthals in the West Asian archaeological record. In other words, the reappearance of Homo sapiens into West Asia may have been a cause for Neanderthals to go extinct in West Asia. Let's focus for a moment on Shanidar III's rib. It's his ninth rib, so that's on his left side. And we learned that it was actually partially healed, so he made something of a recovery after the violence. That being said, according to the U.S. Smithsonian Museum, the attack on his rib also likely collapsed his left lung. Furthermore, no other ribs were damaged in whatever caused this violence. We can also tell that Shanidar III lived fairly long. He was at least 40 years old, and we can tell that he had arthritis. Both Shanidar I and Shanidar III lived somewhere between 45 and 55,000 years ago. As I mentioned before, this dates them squarely at the twilight of Neanderthals in West Asia. The entire Neanderthal species would go extinct somewhere around 40,000 years ago. Now, there are many theories as to why Neanderthals went extinct, ranging from climactic shifts to interspecies violence. While I think both of these are contributing factors, a 2021 paper by Vason et al. Points towards demography, or interbreeding between species, as being a defining factor. We won't go directly into this today, but maybe one day I'll talk about the debate surrounding the extinction of Neanderthals. Now, there are other Neanderthal bodies out there and other signs of Neanderthal mortuary practices, such as in France. And this points to mortuary practice being done across the range of where Neanderthal lives, all the way from France to Shanidar Cave. But Shanidar speaks to me, right? So I just find it so interesting that on the precipice of extinction, both in West Asia and as a species, Neanderthals took the time to intentionally bury their dead. And they cared, while they were alive, for two members who had devastating and debilitating injuries. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. Shanidar I was partially blind, mostly deaf, had arthritis, was an amputee, and Shanidar III punctured lung, which that makes it hard to do anything in addition to arthritis. The fact that they had all of those injuries, all of that, what some people would consider maybe dead weight, the fact that their group not only obviously cared for them during their lives, and we can tell again in the bone record because they show recovery, or at least partial recovery of their injuries, but also because they were intentionally buried. Like, we today, something like 45 to 55,000 years later, are able to tell that they were loved, like, because we found their remains, because the people who buried them loved them so much. Like, that is awesome to me. And that, I think that's the real reason why Shanidar speaks to me so much. So to conclude today, according to my 23andMe, I have about like 2% Neanderthal DNA. And to me, that's fascinating. When I first learned about that a couple of years ago, I was not so fascinated. I was like, oh my gosh, I have like caveman in me. I've seen the Geico commercials. But, while 2% is actually not that much compared to the general population, that actually puts me in like the bottom 25% of people. So like most people on Earth have more Neanderthal DNA than I do. I still find it fascinating because it links me with the other people, like the other humans, the humans who didn't make it. They're not here anymore. Homo sapiens are all that's left, for better or for worse. But in a way, parts of them live on, and I hope I've made that clear. Not just genetically speaking, but also like there are things we can glean from the archaeological record that give us just a glimpse into the lives of Neanderthals, and as we'll discuss eventually in this series, the lives of other humans. So with that, thank you so much for watching. Again, I hope you're having a great new year, and until next time, take care. Bye-bye.